After nearly 4 decades on the bench, Judge Frank Caprio believed he had witnessed every kind of courtroom behavior imaginable: rage, fear, regret, defiance. Defendants had begged, cried, issued threats, and pleaded for mercy. But in all those years, in tens of thousands of cases, nothing compared to what happened one October Wednesday, when a man walked into his courtroom and tried to buy his way out by literally throwing cash. That man was Howard Graham Buffett, 68 years old, son of billionaire Warren Buffett. With an estimated personal fortune of around $400 million, built through agriculture ventures and family wealth, he entered the courtroom with the confidence of someone used to ownership, not accountability. Dressed in an expensive blazer and custom cowboy boots, he carried the unmistakable attitude of a man who assumed money would settle everything quickly and quietly. But seated in the front row was someone who could not be bought. Detective Marcus Williams of the Providence Police Department, a 15-year veteran, father of 3, sat there injured and resolute. His arm rested in a sling, his shoulder dislocated after being shoved during a DUI stop. Bruises marked his jaw from hitting the pavement, and his expression reflected the quiet fury of a lawman assaulted simply for doing his job by someone who believed wealth made him untouchable. The charges were severe: assault on a police officer, driving under the influence, resisting arrest, and attempted bribery of a public official. According to dashcam footage and the police report, the incident began shortly after 11:30 p.m. when Howard Buffett's Range Rover was seen swerving through downtown Providence, cutting lanes and running a red light. Detective Williams, assigned to DUI enforcement that night, initiated the stop. When Buffett failed the field sobriety tests and grew aggressive, the detective moved to make an arrest. That's when Buffett shoved him hard enough to dislocate his shoulder, then reached into his wallet, pulling out stacks of $100 bills and tossing them toward the officer while shouting that infamous question, the one Judge Caprio had heard too many times before: "Take it and forget this ever happened." Those were the words Howard Buffett had thrown at Detective Marcus Williams that night on the street. The detective didn't take the money. He radioed for backup. Within minutes, Howard Buffett was in handcuffs. Now, standing before Judge Frank Caprio, Buffett clearly believed what failed on the roadside would succeed in the courtroom. He believed money would still save him. He was wrong. What followed over the next 16 minutes would become one of the most watched courtroom moments of Judge Caprio's career, because it proves something America needs to hear again and again: wealth does not buy immunity. Judge Caprio reviewed the file calmly. The charges were unmistakably serious: driving under the influence, assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, and attempting to bribe a public official. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a pattern. Howard Buffett's attorney rushed to soften the damage, calling it an overreaction, a simple traffic stop gone wrong. Judge Caprio shut it down immediately. The dashcam footage didn't lie. The vehicle weaving, the red light ignored, the failed sobriety tests, the physical assault. The facts were already on record. When Judge Caprio gave Howard Buffett the chance to speak for himself, the entitlement finally surfaced in full. Buffett dismissed the charges, blamed the officer, and framed himself as the victim of harassment. Then came the moment that changed everything. He didn't argue law. He didn't express remorse. He made an offer. He suggested that everyone had a price, and that this problem could be made to disappear if Judge Caprio simply named a number. The courtroom froze. Judge Caprio set his pen down slowly, deliberately. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show anger. He asked one question, clear, precise, devastating. Did you just offer to pay this court to dismiss criminal charges? Howard Buffett didn't deny it. He shrugged, as if bribery were just another business transaction, as if justice were negotiable. In that moment, it became clear to everyone present: this case was no longer just about drunk driving or assault. It was about whether money could openly challenge the rule of law and win. And Judge Frank Caprio was about to make sure it didn't. Let's resolve this efficiently. That was Howard Buffett's mindset. He believed money could smooth everything over. He offered donations, $500,000 spread across courts and police charities, as if justice were a ledger that only needed balancing. Judge Frank Caprio didn't raise his voice. He didn't react emotionally. He did something far more dangerous for a man like Howard Buffett. He stayed calm. Judge Caprio made it clear that what had just been suggested was not generosity, not efficiency, and certainly not negotiation. It was an attempted bribe, spoken out loud in open court. He chose, for the moment, not to escalate it further. Instead, he did what courts are meant to do. He turned to the evidence. When the dashcam footage began, the courtroom shifted. The video didn't argue. It didn't exaggerate. It simply showed the truth frame by frame. Howard Buffett's Range Rover drifted across lanes, crossed the center line, and pushed through a light that had already turned red. The patrol lights came on. The vehicle didn't stop immediately. It rolled on for another block, just long enough to raise questions no defense attorney wants answered. The stop itself was professional. Calm. Routine. The questions were clear. The responses were not. Howard's speech was slightly slurred. His patience thin. His confidence misplaced. When asked about drinking, he minimized. When asked to step out of the vehicle, he resisted. When tested, his balance failed him completely. Steps off the line, arms flailing, nearly falling. At that moment, the case was already decided. Then came the arrest. That's when entitlement replaced judgment. Howard Buffett didn't respond like an ordinary citizen being lawfully detained. He responded like someone who had never been told no. He invoked his last name. He invoked his father's wealth. And then he crossed the line that turned a DUI arrest into something far worse. He reached for his wallet. $100 bills came out in handfuls. They floated through the air, hit the pavement, scattered under streetlights. He spoke as if money were authority, as if cash could rewrite reality. The footage ended. The courtroom didn't make a sound. Judge Caprio looked up, not with anger, but with disappointment. The kind reserved for people who confuse privilege with power and wealth with worth. What the video showed was not a misunderstanding. It was not harassment. It was not self-defense. It was a clear record of intoxication, resistance, assault, and the belief that money could erase consequences. And in Judge Caprio's courtroom, that belief was about to collapse. Howard Buffett didn't stop at words. He doubled down. He tossed out a number, $20,000, as if it were a magic eraser. When Detective Williams moved to do his job and place him in cuffs, Howard responded with violence. He shoved the detective with both hands, hard enough to send him crashing onto the pavement. The fall dislocated the officer's shoulder. Pain echoed through the scene, and so did entitlement. Backup arrived quickly. Howard fought every second, shouting about wealth, influence, and power he thought he controlled. By the time the video ended, the courtroom understood something clearly. This wasn't confusion or panic. It was arrogance colliding with the law. Judge Caprio looked at Howard Buffett and saw no remorse, only anger that his money hadn't worked. When asked if he still claimed self-defense, Howard didn't hesitate. In his mind, the officer was wrong for refusing the cash. To him, bribery wasn't a crime. It was a transaction gone badly. That's when Judge Caprio stood. And when Judge Caprio stands, the room knows the lesson is coming. He explained calmly, deliberately, that money does not convert crimes into negotiations. That law enforcement officers are not for sale. That courts are not marketplaces. And that believing otherwise is not sophistication, it's corruption. Detective Williams then spoke. 15 years on the force, countless difficult arrests, but never once had someone thrown cash at him like he was disposable. He talked about the surgery, the missed work, the children he still had to support. And then he said something that cut deeper than anger. Howard Buffett's actions dishonored the values his own father was known for. Silence followed. Judge Caprio didn't hesitate after that. The evidence was overwhelming. The verdict was unavoidable. Guilty on every count: DUI, assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, and attempted bribery. When the defense tried to lean on Howard's age, Judge Caprio shut it down instantly. 68 wasn't an excuse. It was an indictment of character. At that age, ignorance wasn't possible, only choice. The sentence reflected that reality. 2.5 years in state prison. Consecutive sentences. No shortcuts. No discounts. and a $250,000 fine for attempting to corrupt the justice system. Howard Buffett turned pale. For the first time, money couldn't protect him. And Judge Caprio made the point unmistakably clear. In his courtroom, wealth doesn't reduce accountability. It increases responsibility. Judge Caprio made it clear that the amount Howard Buffett had casually offered to make this disappear would not erase guilt. Instead, that same figure would be directed to a fund supporting injured police officers. The response only exposed Howard's mindset even further. Howard reached for his checkbook, irritated and impatient, as if this were a business deal delayed by paperwork. He asked if writing the check would finally end it. Judge Caprio stopped him immediately. This was no longer about money. Prison was now unavoidable. That's when Howard crossed a line few defendants ever dared to approach. In a burst of rage, he pulled out a thick roll of cash and hurled it toward the bench. Bills scattered across the courtroom floor and desk as he shouted that everyone had a price and dared the judge to name his. Gasps rippled through the room. The bailiff moved instinctively, but Judge Caprio raised his hand and halted him. Then the judge stepped down from a bench. Leaving the money untouched, Judge Caprio walked straight up to Howard and stood just feet away. His voice was calm, controlled, and devastating. He explained that in less than a minute, Howard had committed new crimes in open court: contempt, attempted bribery of a judicial officer, and disruption of court proceedings, each carrying additional prison time. Howard began to unravel, invoking his wealth, his father, his influence. Judge Caprio shut it down with one sentence. Howard's father was not on trial. Howard was. One built a reputation on integrity. The other tried to buy immunity. The order was immediate. Arrest him. Add another year for contempt. Seize every dollar thrown as evidence. Howard resisted as officers moved in, shouting threats and promises of appeals. Judge Caprio responded without raising his voice. The next years of Howard's life would be spent learning that wealth does not equal character and money does not place anyone above the law. As Howard was taken away, still shouting that everyone had a price, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Caprio returned to the bench, stepping past the scattered bills without touching them. Every note would be logged, photographed, and entered into evidence. Then he turned to Detective Williams and made one final point clear. Full restitution would be paid. Not as a favor, as justice. Judge Caprio ordered full restitution without hesitation. Medical bills, lost income, pain, and suffering. Howard Buffett would pay $75,000 in total. Then the judge turned to Detective Williams and acknowledged what truly mattered. He had done his duty, refused a bribe, and upheld the integrity of the badge. The detective nodded, visibly shaken but proud. Judge Caprio then addressed the courtroom. He reminded everyone who Howard Buffett was, the son of one of the most respected and wealthy men in America. Warren Buffett, a man known worldwide for discipline, ethics, and responsibility, built his legacy on values that money alone could never buy. But his son, the judge said plainly, had learned the opposite lesson: that cash solves problems, that power erases consequences, that everyone can be purchased. That belief collapsed in this courtroom. Howard Buffett had thrown money at a judge, shouting that justice had a price. Judge Caprio made it clear that he was wrong. In that courtroom, integrity was not for sale. Accountability could not be negotiated. Wealth bought nothing but consequences. When the gavel finally fell, the moment didn't end. It spread. Within days, the footage went viral, reaching tens of millions. Commentators argued. Analysts debated. But the public response was overwhelming. People saw something rare: a courtroom where money failed. Days later, Judge Caprio received a handwritten letter from Omaha, Nebraska. It was from Warren Buffett himself. In it, he expressed regret for his son's behavior, support for the sentence, and gratitude for a judge who refused to be bought. He acknowledged, with humility, that consequences long avoided had finally arrived and were necessary. Years passed. When Howard Buffett eventually returned to court after serving his sentence, he was no longer defiant or entitled. He stood humbled. He admitted that prison had taught him what wealth never had, that integrity, honor, and justice have no price tag. Some lessons, he said, cannot be purchased, only learned. Judge Caprio had not acted out of anger or revenge. He had done what the law demanded. And the message was unmistakable. Money may open doors, but it does not open prison cells. That isn't punishment. That is justice. Judge Caprio ordered full restitution without hesitation. Medical bills, lost income, pain, and suffering. Howard Buffett would pay $75,000 in total. Then the judge turned to Detective Williams and acknowledged what truly mattered. He had done his duty, refused the bribe, and upheld the integrity of the badge. The detective nodded, visibly shaken but proud. Judge Caprio then addressed the courtroom. He reminded everyone who Howard Buffett was, the son of one of the most respected and wealthy men in America. Warren Buffett, a man known worldwide for discipline, ethics, and responsibility, built his legacy on values that money alone could never buy. But his son, the judge said plainly, had learned the opposite lesson, that cash solves problems, that power erases consequences, that everyone can be purchased. That belief collapsed in this courtroom. Howard Buffett had thrown money at a judge, shouting that justice had a price. Judge Caprio made it clear that he was wrong. In that courtroom, integrity was not for sale. Accountability could not be negotiated. Wealth bought nothing but consequences. When the gavel finally fell, the moment didn't end. It spread. Within days, the footage went viral, reaching tens of millions. Commentators argued. Analysts debated. But the public response was overwhelming. People saw something rare, a courtroom where money failed. Days later, Judge Caprio received a handwritten letter from Omaha, Nebraska. It was from Warren Buffett himself. In it, he expressed regret for his son's behavior, support for the sentence, and gratitude for a judge who refused to be bought. He acknowledged, with humility, that consequences long avoided had finally arrived and were necessary. Years passed. When Howard Buffett eventually returned to court after serving his sentence, he was no longer defiant or entitled. He stood humbled. He admitted that prison had taught him what wealth never had, that integrity, honor, and justice have no price tag. Some lessons, he said, cannot be purchased, only learned. Judge Caprio had not acted out of anger or revenge. He had done what the law demanded. And the message was unmistakable. Money may open doors, but it does not open prison cells. That isn't punishment. That is justice. Justice isn't for sale, and power doesn't rewrite the law. In Judge Caprio's courtroom, wealth failed, but accountability stood firm. Because in a real democracy, no one is above the law.